Stormgate is not the answer, and frankly, it never was. Many of us viewed it initially whenever it was announced, and we heard the rumblings of it was the Starcraft 2 Wings of Liberty devs behind it, and that they were really going to focus on making an RTS game that had staying power and was competitive and fun to watch. And not only that, but they were talking about things like making sure that you would be able to play team games. It wasn't going to be a pure 1v1 game. The devs over at Frost Giant Studios who are making Stormgate have a huge focus on appealing to the noob. And that was good to hear because StarCraft 2, when it launched, was deeply flawed in terms of not being able to communicate. There were no chat channels in the game. This was a game that was as cutthroat in 1v1 as it gets in the server, but even in between games, the ability to communicate and socialize with people was essentially not there. So whenever we consider who the Stormgate devs are, we have to consider a lot of them were involved with Wings of Liberty. So that's a big paradigm that I think about. It's like, okay, well, if these guys were involved with Wings of Liberty, then they are aware of its impact, because Wings of Liberty in many ways had a huge impact on the scene, but it also sort of captured lightning in a bottle in the sense that not everything that they did was replicable. This was one of those things where you could try to make a game like StarCraft, but you really had to get lucky in a couple regards as far as pro gamers had to be there and be interested, which there was no question about that. People were all in on StarCraft 2 right when it came out. Brood War was definitively the best RTS, the most skillful game out there, and it had been out for over a decade. So whenever StarCraft 2 came out, it was huge, and this helped build Twitch TV, which, if we think about Twitch TV, man, this is a website that was sort of the backbone of gaming and esports for a long time. But I think at this point it's fair to say that it's pretty much dead, because a few months ago Twitch announced that they were ending their partnership with the Korean streamers. And that essentially means that none of the guys that live in Korea are going to get paid for their stream, which is ridiculous because if we consider the fact that these Korean guys are the best players in the world, it's ridiculous that they don't get paid for streaming. And if we think about the sort of content that's promoted on Twitch, it's become a tawdry sewer site, a promiscuous, disgusting gimmick cam site, essentially, where Twitch has sold out to the lowest common denominator. They've even gone and banned words like simp site-wide because they want that money flowing in. If you don't know, Twitch gets half the money from these subscriptions, so it benefits them deeply to have a bunch of losers sub to e-girls doing painting body streams. And whenever we look at the fall of Twitch, we have to sort of look at this event, this ending of all partnership in Korea, as an epitome of what's wrong with Twitch. Yeah, sorry, best gamers in the whole world. You're not allowed to stream on our cam site. I mean, that's just ridiculous. If we think about Korea as a region, this is a region that has tremendous impact on esports. And even if we ignore esports and look at just the streamers themselves, these are some of the most brilliant mechanical players to ever touch StarCraft, some of the most committed, disciplined, intelligent people to have ever touched the game. Guys like Parting, they're just going to stop streaming on Twitch. So, okay, what does that mean for you as the viewer? Well, if they stream on YouTube, that's where you as a foreigner fan will watch it. But a lot of these guys who don't have YouTube followings or care about YouTube are just going to switch to Afrika, the Korean site, which is a big pain to use. Like the entire UI is in Hangul, and it's one of those things where if 95% of the stuff you watch is on Twitch, you're probably not going to like click on Afrika. It requires you to go to a whole different site. So this is a death blow to many of the talented Korean streamers. And not only is that a bummer, and it's completely wrong and disgusting, but it really represents and shows how far Twitch has fallen, because it's not like Twitch just stopped supporting in like Nicaragua or a country where there's not a high percentage of top-end streamers. I mean, this is South Korea. Think about not only Starcraft, which we're watching right now, but games like League of Legends have also been dominated by the Koreans for years. The OGN, aka the LCK, like the Koreans' League of Legends attempt at the GSL that Monte Cristo and Doa did, that was a really good, entertaining stream as Huck force fields the ramp, preventing Idra from scouting. And I know it's League of Legends, and we sort of scorn at that as StarCraft fans, but that had merit, and those guys deserve to have a broadcast. And Idra's going to get a Ling in here and see what Huck's doing. As it's 3 gates here on Crossfire. Huck was going for a big move out here, pulls his probe to kill Idra's Lings as the natural finishes and a cannon starts. Roaches and Burrow on the way here for the macro machine. I picked an Idra vs Huck game from an early MLG because these were guys that helped build Twitch. If you look at why people tuned into Twitch back when it was Justin TV and starting to become Twitch TV and become relevant, it was to see games like this. There were other places on the internet where you could see people take their clothes off. People understood that. They didn't go to Twitch for that like cretins. If we look at what Twitch has become now, you've told the best players in the world that they can't make money using their site, and then you've intentionally promoted like the most disgusting backwards behavior to not only occur but become a lion's share of what the site is about. And that's really driven the site into the ground and made it completely useless. And learning that the Koreans will not be able to make money off of Twitch really is the death blow for the site in many ways, because it's like, think about organizations like the GSL or even like OGN, they're just straight up stopping support for the whole country. So they'll just go elsewhere, you know what I mean? It's one of those things where it's terrible for all the players in the sense that, think about parting. Like, this is a guy who has a plethora of foreigner fans and was making a bunch of money from his Twitch and his subs. He has to now like just stream somewhere else and like make money off of donations. So the fact that this decision was made speaks volumes to the people at Twitch TV and the mindset of Twitch TV and sort of what is prioritized and what's important over there, as Idra's tunneling claws have finished and he's going for Galil Constitution now. This is Crossfire. This is a really, really tight map with a lot of chokes, and this is a notorious force field abuse map, because if you look throughout the middle of the map, it's like ramp high ground, ramp high ground, ramp high ground. This one's a nightmare for Zerg. This one was good for Protoss that favored force field styles, and it was just an absolute nightmare against Terran, because essentially you can't fight anywhere if you're Zerg. Like, think about, at this time, Mutiling Baneling flying in and dealing with Terran bio is essentially not usable on this map. And look how tiny these chokes are. We can see why Idra opened burrow movement and early burrow, as far as the fact that, yeah, most of the time roach speed was the priority and people got roach speed first. However, on a chokish small map like this, and a guy like Huck who was known to do aggressive warp gate abuse, you would go for the ultra safe, not die to force field tunneling claws. Very rarely. This was not something that was common. But talking about Stormgate, this is a game that had so much hype a few months ago, and everyone believed in, and believed in to a fault as Immortals get chronoed out, because the way that people viewed Stormgate was like a predecessor, or this was a game that was supposed to follow StarCraft to proceed, not precede. Is an Immortal pushout's about to occur here for Huck. And everyone sort of hitched their wagon to this and put all their eggs in this basket. Like, StarCraft 2 is like obviously on its way out. I mean, if Artosis is doing the GSL anymore, the writing's on the wall, right? And Idra's trying to go into Infestors here. But the Stormgate devs, as they opened the beta up about a week ago, really showed that their focus was not really on macro, as Idra's trying to spread out his roaches here and not die to this big, scary 2-base push from Huck, who clears force fields and then retreats. If you watch my early Stormgate videos, one of the main things that I talk about is, okay, I'm glad that they want the low-level player to like the game and like be able to play 3v3, but when it comes down to it, you've got to balance for 1v1 and have clean, crisp macro mechanics. The game has got to be about macro. It's got to have responsive micro. And in many ways, it looks like the Stormgate devs sort of missed the mark on that. If we look specifically at the way that the macro works, the units essentially build instantly. Whenever a building finishes, a unit producing facility, it instant builds a unit. It'll even build units that you don't have the tech for instantly in some instances. And if we think about the way that the mining works, you scale up so fast, and essentially not enough of the game is about macro. In their mind, it's really fun to just micro the units. So when they said like, yeah, we've got some Warcraft 3 devs, we're gonna make it like Warcraft 3, as a huge engagement occurs here, Idra fungling most of the army and trying to move under Huck's army. He bounces up, he'll try to focus fire the Immortals, but there was this problem where like there's still Protoss units, so when you would come up beneath them, sometimes you would still just lose the fight, especially if they had Immortals. Idra making 20 roaches and retreating as he's starting his Spire and Hive. When I say starting, I mean about 80% done, but Huck's bringing the hammer down and might just kill him. The problem with Stormgate is its macro. The macro is too easy. They've gone way too far in the direction of trying to appeal to the lowest common denominator. They've essentially made the macro like a UMS game, as a huge fungal occurs on all of Huck's stalkers. Idra wants to get the shields off of those before he fights. The Immortal almost dead Immortals, of course, do bonus damage to armored and own roaches. Huck, of course, on 2 bases. Signature aggressive maneuver. Doesn't really have a plan or third behind this. Idra has the corner base and the gold, so a huge crushing victory from the macro machine who boots up 20 roaches. Huck desperately trying to take a third. Idra brilliantly has an Overlord spewing creep over that, something that to this day you want to do. But the Stormgate devs did exactly what I was worried about. They were way too concerned about the lowest common denominator. They made the macro way too easy. They made the macro of making workers not important enough. And they made a lot of like corny, unfun micro. Like, that's not fun. Like, they had this idea of, okay, StarCraft 2 fights have too much splash and end too fast. And that's true with things like the Oracle and Widowmine drop. But in their mind, it's like, yeah, the way that we fix that is we have long, ostentatious, boring fights that are blobs of tiny units fighting against each other, and no one can tell what the hell is going on. It's just a bunch of tiny units fighting, and but the fight lasts a little longer. There's nothing interesting, and the micro is somewhat minimal and unimpactful. But yeah, it's longer. Like, that's not the point, guys. When people say like the fights in StarCraft 2 are too fast, or like you look away and everything's gone, they're talking about like Oracle. They're talking about Mind Drop. If we think about like Mutiling Baneling versus Biomine when Big Mac's armies fight, like, that's fun and good and exciting to watch. And guess what? You don't have to be a StarCraft 2 expert to figure out what the heck is going on in those engagements. You can have watched 5 games of StarCraft and deduce like, oh, like a bunch of Banelings hit Marines like the Zerg did well, like, wow, those splits are really clean and instant. When you watch a Stormgate game, even when you've watched 20 or 30 games, it's hard to tell what the hell is going on, especially with the Zerg type race, Infernal. Like, these tiny little units are fighting for long periods of time. And then another mistake that they made is making essentially like an even gimmicky, more gimmicky version of the Reaper, which is like a dog unit for what would be like the Terran race. And this thing's out early, and it just constantly can harass your workers, and it's essentially like a Protoss probe in Brood War in your Terran. And the fact that they thought that that was interesting shows how flawed their judgment is. Because in their minds, they think like micro good, micro fun. Like, players want a micro. Like, macro isn't fun. And it's like, no, 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 you're missing the point. Macro is the game. That's the game, is macro. Is like hitting your macro, not getting supply blocked, having great expansion timing, having cleanup great timing, using good fights on your opponent's side of the map to predicate an expansion advantage, understanding expansion patterns, good scouting. Like, this is literally the game. This is the fundamentals of RTS. So when you make an RTS with UMS macro mechanics, with joke buildings that essentially insta-build the units, you've gone too far in the direction of trying to appeal to the bad player. You've gone too far in the direction of, okay, well, we want the guy who picks this game up once a month to still be competitive. Like, you can't do that. Having a competitive 1v1 game and having like a funsy team game, those are mutually exclusive. And you have to balance for the highest level. You have to balance for the pro gamers. You have to balance for 1v1. Now, if you do something, a StarCraft 2 equivalent of like we're balancing for 1v1, but then in team games, the Stargate is disabled, so it's obviously like there's a ton of mindless error spam in team games. You can balance for the 1v1 and then make adjustments for the team game after. Like you can have different little balances or restrictions if you want for team games, but don't balance for the lowest common denominator and go from there. Also, I've seen this very troubling thing occur with the StormGate devs in the process of the game where the developers ask for a plethora of money and then they keep asking for more and more money and more and more money and more and more and more and more. And it's like, well, hold on, guys. You just opened up the beta. And yeah, it's just a beta and it's early as Huck GG's. But really, what's one of the only important things when it comes to a beta, like the core macro mechanics? Because like that's what you're going to build off of, right? Like the independent balance really doesn't matter that much. So what do you have at its core right now as Stormgate the game? You have a game with horrible macro mechanics, absolutely horrible, laughable macro mechanics that essentially make the game like uncompetitive and not fun to watch and not skillful. And that is really the core of the game, macro. And that's what everyone who likes the game and is good at the game understands the mechanics and fundamentals are about. Even if they like to micro their units and they're a micro-based player, they get how important macro is. And like good intelligent players like Rhett understand like there's a lot of fun to macro. And like to a lot of people, that is like the fun element of the game. Is like nailing your macro, defending the attacks, playing intelligently, retaining your high value units. So that should be encouraged, not killed in the womb. So when I look at Stormgate, it's a dime a dozen RTS with corny little camps around the map with joke UMS mechanics. And that's a travesty. And you know what? A lot of people have hitched their wagon to this game to the point where it's essentially their next job and they want to get in at the ground level, so they're going to grovel to Frost Giant and say good things and be dishonest and really be ostentatious and sort of meat ride the game and present it as though it's good no matter what because their future is contingent upon the game being good and entertaining. So remember that whenever you watch Stormgate content from other people and they say like, oh, the macro's fine. Oh, I can totally tell what's going on in the fight. Yeah, man, Infernal versus Infernal, those 20-second fights with all the tiny units, not only can I tell what's going on, but they're entertaining. Oh, by the way, we need more money. We need more money. Did I mention that we need more money? We need more money. Come on, Frost Giant. You guys really, really are scaring me here with this one. The macro is what's important. Not the micro gimmick. Not the early game dog micro that's only like fighting against a Reaper. The person microing the dog thinks it's a burden and doesn't think it's fun. The person defending against it thinks it's worse than Nitro Pack Reaper. That's what you idiots came up with when someone asked, what do people think is fun about StarCraft? One of you Plat League jerk-offs was like, yeah, marine splitting, micro. And you went from there, didn't you? That was your whole design philosophy, was just make everything more micro and just give them micro. Forget the macro, just give them micro. All the newbies will lap it up. Put a 3v3 in there. Make the macro unimportant. Guys, you can have your team game that's that, or you can have a real competitive 1v1 game. They're mutually exclusive. How long do you think the talented people are going to stick around if the macro mechanics are a laughing stock, like they are? Not very long. This is a really, really troubling start and a really like awful reaction. You had a game with broken macro mechanics and oh, they haven't added a third race. Who cares? Like the very fundamental way that like the minerals work and the way that the unit build times work is like terribly flawed. The way that like the long fights occur, like people say art style, oh, it's the art style. Don't complain about the art style. Art style is subjective. I'm not talking about the art style. I'm talking about visual clarity here. You can't tell what the hell is going on in this stupid game. I watched 3 games of Starcraft and like you could tell what was going on in the game on a base level, like when 2 different races were fighting, who was winning and what the units did. Stormgate is a mess. And it's a mess in the way that is like really scary and sort of irredeemably a mess if they don't change it. Make the unit build times longer. Make the initial worker count lower. Try to make macro matter. You guys have tried to completely take macro out of the game. That's incredibly foolish. And Twitch TV is a disgrace. Stay easy.